In 1948, a sliver of desert land, hemmed in by enemies and haunted by the Holocaust, dared to declare itself a nation. The world laughed. The region braced for war. And the question echoed like gunfire in the dust. How could a country with nothing, no oil, no allies, no money, possibly survive, let alone thrive? On May 14, 1948, in a humble museum hall in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion stood before a shaky microphone and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Outside, celebrations rippled through the Jewish neighborhoods, but they were short-lived. Within hours, 5 Arab nations declared war. The newborn state had no formal military, no established government, and no real economy. British forces had just exited, leaving behind little but chaos. Israel's bank reserves were nearly empty. Its population was fractured, a patchwork of Holocaust survivors, refugees from Arab lands and ideological Zionists, and its borders were under siege. But here's the twist. While the world expected Israel to collapse, it didn't. It adapted swiftly. Within its first 3 years, Israel absorbed over 700,000 Jewish immigrants, doubling its population. Many arrived with nothing but trauma, stateless Holocaust survivors, and Jews fleeing persecution from Arab countries, who left behind homes, assets, and identity. The government imposed strict food rationing, powdered eggs, thin lentil stews, and a meager allowance of bread. This era became known as the Tzina, or austerity. Citizens stood in endless queues, sharing cramped tenements. Black markets flourished, and yet, beneath the hardship, a fire began to smolder. The people who had endured history as worst atrocities had not come to merely survive, they came to rebuild. What they lacked in capital, they made up in human capital. Grit, ingenuity, and a culture of questioning everything. Desperate for arms during the War of Independence, Israel turned to an unlikely method: clandestine arms smuggling. Agents traveled to Czechoslovakia and France under fake passports, buying surplus World War II weapons. In New York, secret Jewish operatives repurposed boats to deliver supplies through underground networks. Behind the veil of legitimacy, shadow economies were forming. The young state walked a tightrope between legality and necessity. Every dollar mattered. Every loophole was exploited for survival. Then came a deeply controversial moment, a deal with the very country responsible for the Holocaust. The reparations agreement with West Germany in 1952. Israel accepted hundreds of millions in payments, not as charity, but as restitution. The nation was bitterly divided. Survivors protested in the streets, but Ben-Gurion stood firm. "We will not let our dead become our downfall," he said. The funds were used not to repay the past, but to build the future. Ships, factories, and power plants. By the late 1950s, Israel's first major industries began to take root. Phosphate mining in the Negev desert. Agricultural innovation in barren soil using drip irrigation, invented by an Israeli engineer who refused to accept the limits of the land. Kibbutzim, socialist farming collectives, formed the backbone of the rural economy. These weren't just farms. They were ideologically fueled experiments where children were raised communally and profits were shared equally. But they weren't enough. Industrialization was slow. Exports were scarce. Inflation was wild. The economy teetered on collapse again. And a question lingered: could Israel ever become more than just a state struggling for breath? Then something unexpected happened. In 1959, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, a military tech company born from necessity, developed a primitive missile guidance system. At the time, it seemed like a niche defense tool, but it planted a seed. Behind the scenes, former soldiers and engineers were beginning to channel their battlefield experience into tech innovation. Israel didn't have natural resources, so it began extracting value from brainpower. The stage was being set for something revolutionary, and it all began in the shadows of hunger and war. They said Israel would not last a month, but it endured and began to dream. What no one saw coming was that the people who once had nothing would one day build something the world couldn't ignore.
Hey guys, enjoying the story? Before we continue, please hit the like button and subscribe. We post weekly documentaries and aim to reach 2,000 subscribers. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Thanks for supporting us. Now, back to the video.
They said it was a mistake. A nation carved from ancient promises, surrounded by hostility, planted in dust. No oil, no water, no allies, no hope. And yet, within decades, Israel would become a technological superpower. But before the world saw success, it saw something else. An experiment doomed to fail. In May of 1948, the ink had barely dried on Israel's declaration of independence when the first bombs fell. 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, invaded simultaneously. They called it a war to erase a mistake, a war to prevent a nation from ever rising. The world watched, expecting a swift and decisive end to the fledgling Jewish state. After all, Israel had no formal army, just scattered survivors of the Holocaust, underground militias, and farmers with rifles. The land they were fighting for? Mostly desert, rocky, dry, and hostile. It offered no riches, no oil fields, no fertile valleys, not even enough fresh water. The situation was dire. Supplies were low, and the newly formed state was under siege. But what the world underestimated was will. Israel's leaders, including David Ben-Gurion, knew that mere survival would require extraordinary innovation. So they made a bold decision. They would build their own weapons. Using hidden workshops and scavenged materials, Israel's underground Haganah forces began producing makeshift arms. Secret deals were struck. Smuggled Czech rifles, homemade grenades, even reassembled World War II fighter planes, all cobbled together in a race against annihilation. It wasn't just a battle for land. It was a battle for legitimacy. And it was won against all odds. The 1948 war ended with Israel's survival, but barely. Over 6,000 Israelis, 1% of the population, were dead. The economy was shattered. Refugees flooded the borders, and the desert remained unforgiving. Here's what most people don't know. In the 1950s, Israel was broke. The government rationed food. There were shortages of sugar, flour, even shoes. With no oil and little industry, Israel was economically isolated. To make matters worse, the land itself was an adversary. The Negev desert, which made up over 60% of Israel's territory, was practically lifeless, cracked earth. No rain and sandstorms that erased months of effort. But instead of seeing failure, Israeli pioneers asked a different question. How can we make the desert work for us? With no natural resources to rely on, Israel began to lean into something it did have human capital. The early waves of Jewish immigrants weren't just farmers or soldiers. Among them were scientists, engineers, scholars, and inventors, many of whom had fled Europe or Arab countries. They brought knowledge, ideas, innovation. In 1959, Israel founded the Weizmann Institute of Science, turning its focus toward scientific research and agricultural breakthroughs. Around the same time, Israeli scientists developed drip irrigation, a water-saving technique that would soon revolutionize farming in arid zones. This wasn't just innovation for convenience, it was innovation for survival. And while their neighbors had oil beneath their feet, Israel had something less visible but more powerful, a culture of problem-solving under pressure. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Israel was not just struggling with internal poverty and agricultural failure, it was also constantly at war. Border raids, terrorist attacks, a fragile existence kept alive by vigilance. In 1967, it all exploded again in just 6 days. The Six-Day War saw Israel fighting Egypt, Jordan, and Syria simultaneously. Against all expectations, Israel captured massive territories. including the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. Suddenly, the map changed. But more importantly, the mindset changed. The world began to realize this tiny nation wasn't just surviving. It was strategizing, learning, growing stronger through adversity. What outsiders saw as chaos, Israelis used as motivation. And slowly, a dangerous question began to form in the minds of world powers. Could Israel actually rise? Despite military victories, the 1970s opened with an economic crisis, hyperinflation, unemployment, budget deficits. But behind closed doors, Israeli economists and planners were quietly sketching something daring, a plan to shift Israel from an agricultural, resource-scarce society into a modern, export-driven economy built on technology and innovation. It sounded absurd. Israel didn't even have a functioning tech sector, yet seeds were being planted literally and figuratively. The military began investing in specialized tech units. Universities were told to collaborate with industries. Young Israelis were encouraged to study science, not just soldiering. This was a nation at a turning point. Would it double down on survival, or bet everything on transformation? The deserts were still dry, the enemies were still circling, and the world still doubted. But beneath the surface, something unstoppable had begun. Not oil, not gas, not gold, but ideas. And in the next chapter, those ideas would catch fire. In the dusty heat of June 1967, as radio signals crackled and warplanes screamed overhead, the very existence of Israel hung by a thread. What unfolded next would rewrite military textbooks and economic history. This is a crucible of fire. Israel, still young and reeling from economic hardship, had spent its first 2 decades in a near-constant state of alert. Surrounded by neighbors sworn to its destruction, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, it wasn't a matter of if war would come, but when. In 1967, the boiling tension finally erupted. Egypt blockaded Israeli shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Syrian artillery harassed Israeli farmers from the Golan Heights. Arab armies massed on the borders, boasting numbers Israel couldn't match. The world held its breath. Then came the 6-day war conflict, so short, so explosive, it's still studied today. In a stunning preemptive strike, Israel launched Operation Focus, wiping out Egypt's air force in hours. The war lasted less than a week, but its outcome? Generational. Israel tripled its land area, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, and West Bank. The geopolitical map of the Middle East had been rearranged in under 144 hours. But with victory came complications. Now responsible for millions of Palestinians, Israel had become a military power, but also a political lightning rod. International condemnation and praise flooded in. Allies became wary. Enemies doubled down. And from the shadows, a new player stirred. Iran. Before revolution turned it into an adversary, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a friend, one of the few Muslim nations to openly trade with Israel. Oil flowed. Military intel was shared. It was a strange, quiet alliance born of necessity, not ideology. But the sands shifted fast. In 1979, the Shah fell, and with him, Israel's covert lifeline to Iranian oil. The Islamic Revolution brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. Death to Israel became state policy. The former ally was now the most virulent enemy. And yet, amid war, betrayal, and blockades, Israel didn't crumble. It innovated. Unable to rely on neighbors or oil-rich lands, Israel pivoted inward. Scarcity became mother to invention. Technologies were birthed under siege: drip irrigation, desalination, cybersecurity. Every threat forced a solution. The Israeli military developed Unit 8200A, cyber intelligence division that would later birth tech unicorns and billion-dollar startups. In essence, the defense complex became a launch pad for private industry. Meanwhile, a crucial geopolitical shift occurred. The United States stepped in. America had observed Israel's resilience and its strategic location. During the Cold War, it needed a foothold in the Middle East. Israel fit the bill. Aid flowed. Weapons contracts, defense partnerships, joint tech R&D, the foundation of a powerful alliance was laid. Not just military, but economic. This new friendship would prove more valuable than oil. With American partnership and sheer necessity, Israel reinvented itself. Slowly, it transitioned from a war economy to a knowledge economy, from farms to fiber optics, from battlegrounds to boardrooms. But the wealth came at a cost. Territorial disputes raged. Uprisings known as intifadas erupted. Peace talks repeatedly failed. The Palestinian question remained a moral and political storm cloud over Israel's success. Even as Tel Aviv became a glittering tech capital, other cities burned with unrest. In May 2021, a new war burst forth. The 12-day war with Hamas in Gaza. Sirens screamed. Missiles flew. The world watched on smartphones as the Iron Dome intercepted rocket after rocket. Another war, another test. But beneath the smoke, the message was clear. Israel's survival was no longer just about defense. It was about deterrence backed by innovation. Warfare had gone digital, so had wealth. And Israel? It was no longer merely surviving. It was thriving. From crumbling borders to billion-dollar startups, from alliances lost to empires forged, Israel's journey was no miracle. It was a grind, a gamble, and at times a gamble with lives on the line. But the transformation was far from over. Because in the next chapter, we explore how Israel rewired the global tech map, turned geopolitical isolation into economic dominance, and why its foreign policy today may define the next century. By the early 2000s, Israel wasn't just surviving anymore. It was building something the world didn't expect. A digital fortress. An empire of code, chips, and ideas. But how did a desert nation, tiny, embattled, surrounded, become one of the world's most powerful tech forces? This is the Silicon Shield. Israel's story had always been one of dualities: war and invention, scarcity and abundance, defense and diplomacy. But after decades of geopolitical tension, one thing became clear. To win future wars, Israel wouldn't just need tanks or soldiers. It would need brains and bandwidth. In the wake of the Second Intifada and the global dot-com bust, Israel's economy wobbled. Tourism tanked. Investments dried up. Bombings had shattered public trust. But rather than collapse, something extraordinary happened. Entrepreneurs rose. In Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Herzliya, garages became incubators. RDF veterans from elite cyber units like Unit 8200 began launching startups armed with nothing but military-grade discipline and unshakable grit. They didn't just think outside the box. They built the box, and soon global giants took notice. Intel opened its first R&D center in Israel in 1974, but in the 2000s, tech behemoths flooded in. Google acquired Waze, the traffic navigation app born in Israel. Apple built its first innovation center outside the U.S. in Israel. Intel's Israeli team invented the chip inside the first MacBook Air. And Mobileye, a Jerusalem-based firm, revolutionized driver assistance systems and sold to Intel for $15.3 billion. All of this from a country smaller than New Jersey. But Israel's tech miracle wasn't accidental. It was engineered through government policy. The Israeli government launched Yozma, a revolutionary venture capital initiative in the 90s. It matched private investments with public funds, reducing risk and sparking an investment frenzy. Then came angel investors, global VCs, IPOs. By 2010, Israel had the highest number of startups per capita in the world. One startup for every 1,400 people. And a new nickname emerged, the Startup Nation. But the tech boom didn't erase the tension. Every rocket attack, every international boycott threat, every whisper of war pushed Israel's innovators harder. Cybersecurity wasn't a niche, it was a lifeline. That lifeline became a global export. Israeli companies now dominate the cyber defense sector. From airport security to fintech protection, Israeli tech is embedded everywhere, sometimes quietly, sometimes controversially. Meanwhile, the bond with the U.S. deepened. America didn't just see Israel as an ally, it saw it as essential. Israel's Iron Dome, partially UC-funded, proved vital in stopping thousands of incoming missiles. U.S. and Israeli cyber units began sharing intelligence. American firms opened their II labs in Tel Aviv. Together, the two nations built a military tech symbiosis unmatched on Earth. But Israel wasn't satisfied being just America's digital stronghold. It expanded east. India, once a vocal critic, became one of Israel's biggest defense customers. China, hungry for innovation, quietly invested in Israeli ports and tech. The Abraham Accords saw normalization with UAE, Morocco, and with them, billions in trade deals. In the shadows of shifting alliances, Israel became not just a regional player, but a global force. Still, not all wounds healed. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza faced daily hardship. Talks of a two-state solution remained in limbo. International criticism intensified. Israel's success came with scrutiny. Was it building prosperity or inequality? Was it protecting democracy or walling others out? These questions haunted the edges of its global reputation. Yet the momentum didn't stop. In the 2020s, Israel launched space tech firms, AI defense tools, quantum computing, experiments. From building on kibbutz farms to launching satellites over the Middle East, Israel had evolved in ways no one imagined. This wasn't just a comeback story. It was a reinvention story. A people who turned trauma into technology, war into wealth, and threat into innovation. But not everything was under control. New enemies were watching. Old alliances were shifting. And in the shadows, Iran was preparing again. In the final part of our series, we uncover the next frontier, Israel's secret cyber wars, the most recent 12-day battle with Iran, and the billion-dollar question: can a nation born in conflict stay wealthy without starting another war? They said it was impossible. They said it couldn't last. But against all odds, Israel, once a barren, war-torn sliver of land, had become a global economic powerhouse, a hub for innovation, a fortress of military dominance, a diplomatic chess player in the most volatile region on Earth. But here's the question no one wants to ask. Has Israel's rise come at too great a cost? And what comes next? Let's rewind just briefly. By the 2010s, Israel's GDP had surged past $300 billion. Tel Aviv had more startups per capita than Silicon Valley. AI, cybersecurity, agritech, and military innovations were flowing out of the tiny nation like a torrent. Intel, Google, Apple all lined up to invest. But while the world admired the tech, behind the screen a storm was brewing. In May 2021, the region once again erupted. But this wasn't another one-sided skirmish. This was precision drone warfare. Iron, no longer under the Shah, but under hardliners, unleashed a series of cyber attacks and drone swarms, aided by proxies across Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. Israel retaliated with laser systems and AI-driven missile shields. The world held its breath. Markets plunged. Diplomats scrambled. And for the first time in decades, Israel's security and economy seemed fragile. In just 12 days, billions were lost. Tech hubs shut down. Tourism vanished. And yet Israel survived, barely. But this war revealed something deeper. The cost of being surrounded by enemies isn't just military, it's existential. We often paint Israel as a nation of Jews, but the truth is more complex. Over 25% of Israeli citizens are Arabs, Muslim, Christian, Druze. There are Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Jews. Russian Jews a fractured mirror of global diaspora. Tensions simmer quietly. Discrimination, accusations of apartheid, internal protests, they don't make international headlines, but they're the cracks beneath the surface. And as the ultra-Orthodox population grows and the secular elite dominate tech and politics, the divide widens. The social contract is fraying. Can a house so divided stand for another generation? Once, it was the Shah of Iran who supported Israel. That alliance died with the 1979 revolution. Then came America offering more than just money, military aid, diplomatic cover at the UN, joint tech ventures, the Iron Dome, the F-35 program. It was America's unconditional love that gave Israel its security umbrella. But what happens when the umbrella closes? In recent years, voices within the U.S. have shifted. Younger generations are more critical of Israel's policies. American politicians, once unanimously pro-Israel, now debate aid packages. The Abraham Accords reshaped the region, but also raised new questions about American motives. Is the alliance unbreakable, or simply convenient until it isn't? Israel's economy continues to surge on the surface. Startups exit, IPOs roar, but the wealth is concentrated. Tel Aviv is now one of the most expensive cities in the world. Housing, unaffordable. Food, pricey. Inequality, rising. And for the first time, young Israelis are leaving seeking opportunity in Berlin, London, New York. Ironically, the startup nation may be losing its founders. As the world shifts from fossil fuels to from nationalism to multipolar chaos, Israel's path becomes less certain. Will it be the Dubai of the Mediterranean or another fortress state slowly cracking from within? Can it maintain peace with the Gulf while ignoring tensions in Gaza? Can it be both a liberal democracy and a religious nation-state? The most explosive question of all, can Israel remain rich without being at war? In 1948, they danced in the streets when independence was declared. In 2024, they danced to IPO bells. But behind the dancing, there's an unease, a whisper, a question the wealth can't silence. Was this miracle sustainable or just borrowed time? And as we end this series, one final twist lingers. Israel's greatest threat may not be an enemy across the border, but one that lies within. What do you think? Is Israel's wealth built on brilliance or conflict? Can a nation so rich in brain power survive its growing divides? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk, debate, unpack. This story isn't over, and it affects us all.